Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, host and head bookologist here at the Get Literate podcast. I'm a book-loving, notebook-hoarding reader and writer on a mission to change lives one book and one notebook at a time. On this podcast, we explore the power of bookology and leading literate lives. We talk all things books and reading and notebooks and writing, mixed in with mindful practices and creativity to create lives we love. You can expect regular weekly episodes focused on 3 books you need to know about on a bookish theme and how to bring those themes to life in our actual lives too. You can also expect author interviews, notebooking inspiration, and topics to help us grow through what we go through and take inspired action to make our lives better. So grab a notebook and your TBR list and let's get literate. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Get Literate podcast. I'm Stephanie, your host and head bookologist, here with a bonus episode. That's right, it is the last day of the month of May, and that means we have a special bonus edition, Monthly Literate Love. It is one of my favorite episodes to create every month, and based on the comments and all of the kind words I receive, I know you enjoy it too. So this past month, inside of my Get Literate Patreon community, we explored the one-word theme of dig. I know, it's kind of a different kind of theme, but if you're in the community, you know how we got to that word and what we've been doing all month long. And if you're not in that community yet, every month we choose one word to read and write and grow into existence in our own lives. And for this word, dig, this word signified just digging deeper with ourselves. Of course, it could mean digging in the dirt and getting things ready for spring and getting our hands dirty, but overall, it was this symbolic word to really just reflect on who we are and where we are and who's around us and what's around us and what's our place in the world. All of those big questions, all of those little questions as well. So when I set out to plan what I wanted my literate life to look like in May, I had a set of questions that I wanted to carry close with me. In terms of my reading life, I wanted to really ask myself, what books seem to be calling to me in this season of life and why? Which books am I saying no to and why? And overall, what messages are the books I'm reading trying to send me? I wanted to dig deeper into that and hopefully dig deeper with my notebook as a way to respond to my reading, which happily I did and will tell you about. In terms of my writing life, I really just wanted to think about a simple question. What needs to show up on the page? As I go to my morning page notebook every morning, what needs to show up without judgment? And that meant a little bit of rewriting, not rewriting, I'm sorry, a little bit of rereading and highlighting in my journal, which I typically do not do. I also wanted to think about the tensions I might be feeling in my writing life and what are some of my writing rules like that I'm setting for myself that I don't need to, like you must write 2 pages every morning. In terms of my learning life, I wanted to rate myself here. I wanted to give myself a score of 1 to 10 and just ask, what do I think of that score? I am a lifelong learner. I really thrive when I'm learning new things, and I just wanted to check in to see how I was doing. And I also wanted to think about, where does my mind wander? I learned in my meditation class that our mind is wandering like at least 45% of the time, even when we don't want to. And if we pay attention to what it's wandering to without judgment, we can learn about where our minds and our bodies and our souls might want to go next. It's also the same if you think about where you feel guilt or where you feel envy in what others are doing and learning, and that may be signs for you as well. I told you we were digging deep this month. And then finally, in the love category, just what's catching my attention this month? What do I seem to be leaning into? How can I bring more of the things that I love into my life? And then a question that I borrowed from Gretchen Rubin, where's the whimsy? in my life? Where are the things that are there just because I love them for no other reason at all? So that's how I went into the month of May. I went in reflective. I went in knowing I was going to dig deep with my Patreon community and knowing that I wanted to get to the end of the month with a better understanding of my reading, writing, and learning than when I walked into it. And I definitely did. So let's get started. First, let's talk about my reading life. And really digging deep and asking myself those questions, I stumbled upon something pretty important. And in fact, it was so important that I dedicated an entire episode to it and then realized I needed a second episode for it. So, what I found out in my reading life was that I've got a lot of reading balls that I'm juggling in the air, right? I've got a lot of TBR lists. I've got TBR lists that are too big. I have physical stacks all around me. I have reading that I want to do and should do and have to do. And I realized that all of that complexity was just starting to overwhelm me. And I noticed that I was reading less and I was starting to abandon books because I wasn't really feeling that I was choosing the right books for me. And I did not like that feeling. I do not like when my reading life starts to stumble because then everything feels like it's falling apart a bit. So I recorded an episode on what I thought was the problem, which was my TBR, trouble with the TBR. Too many of them, too big, too long, too old, all of the things. But as I recorded that episode and I kept digging deeper throughout the month, I realized what my problem really was a lack of balance around my reading obligations. So our reading obligations are those things that we want or have to do, right? Books we want to read, books we think we should read, and books we have to read. And I have all of those in my reading life. The ones that I really want to read that I typically push to the side because I should read the other books that other people are reading, that other bloggers are reading, that other podcasters are reading. And oh, by the way, there's the books I have to read because I need to read them for the podcast and especially my Kidlit Love podcast. And so I realized that my reading obligations were out of balance, and that was the problem. So a couple of tweaks, really thinking about on my bookish spreadsheet, what kind of reading obligation is this? And am I balancing those reading obligations over time? That was key. And I think really taking a look at that is going to help me in the future to balance everything out, just like we balance things we want to do and have to do and should do in real life. I found that I needed to do that for my reading life as well. So when I looked at the books I've read, I only read 3 adult books for pleasure this month. And if I'm completely honest, 2 of those books that were for pleasure were actually books I had to read because I agreed to read them for a blog tour or a review tour. But thankfully, not only did I have to read them, but I wanted to read them. So I'm getting better at picking books that cross a lot of those reading obligations. So the first one up, not only did I want to read it, but I had to read it for the Get Literate book club because thankfully everybody else wanted to read it too, was the Red Address book by Sophia Lundberg. This book, oh, it was an emotional roller coaster as readers got the chance to look back on the life of Doris, who is a 96-year-old woman living alone in her Stockholm apartment. Now, her Red Address book that was given to her by her father when she was a child sits close by her. And it reminds her of all the people that she has loved and unfortunately lost over the course of her years as she has outsurvived many of them. Now, from her sudden departure from her family at a very young age to her years spent in Paris and America and beyond, Doris has a story to tell, and that story is full of hardship and loss, but it is also especially full of love. And the way that the story is structured, readers get to know Doris today, in her present day, with what's actually going on in her life, but also Doris in her childhood and Doris in her prime, and all of the people who have made an impression on her life over time. So as we slowly peel back the layers of her and her life, we get this front seat view of how the world and her relationships have shaped her. Oh, this is a book, I said in my review, that will haunt you in the best way possible, daring you to consider the love that you have in your own lives. And I have to mention, there is a heart-stopping question on the last page. You just won't stop thinking about it. You can't unsee it. You can't unread this book. It is a book that is going to stay in my heart for a long time, and I imagine is going to stay in all readers' hearts for a long time as well. It was such a wonderful book, and we had such a fun time discussing it in book club. That's The Red Address book by Sophia Lundberg. Now, next up, my second adult novel was called Finding Fran, a midlife Moxie novel, which is part of the Midlife Moxie series by Nancy Christie. Now, this was a book that I agreed to do a book review and a blog tour of because I was so smitten with the publisher's blurb. So here's what you need to know about Fran. Fran is a romance novelist in her mid-50s who rose to fame with the traditional romance trope, right? You know what that is. But her own love life has just tanked. So we've got this juxtaposition of her writing about the most princess-like romances while hers is just going south. She's struggling to meet the deadline of her next novel, which should follow in that traditional romance trope. And as she is struggling and trying to write, she answers a phone call. And that phone call changes everything because in it, she learns of her husband's infidelity. So now she's reeling and she decides to head away for a solo trip to clear her head and finally just make a dent in the manuscript, get it done, and figure out where life is going to go. But rather than writing, because writing right now is very hard, she's enjoying delicious food, she's watching the salty waves, and she's asking herself the kinds of hard questions someone asks themselves when their entire life has been upended. Questions about her writing and the stereotypical predictability of her books were high. The parallel connections she was making to her own life, she was considering them all. Here's the cool part. As she was writing, she decides to write her way to a new kind of novel with a strong, happy, fulfilled woman at the core. And yep, you guessed it, she starts to become the very thing that she embodies on the page. This is a novel of reinventing ourselves in midlife, and I loved it. And the best part is that it's part of the Midlife Moxie series, which means there are more books for me to enjoy. Now, the third book is a short story collection, which is typically something that I don't read, but this book is changing that. So this book is titled Feisty Deeds, Historical Fiction of Daring Women. And it is a collection of stories by 23 authors that is edited by Kimberly Sullivan. Now, I first found this because one of my favorite authors, you know her, she's been on the podcast multiple times, Terry M. Brown. She is featured in this book. She has written books like Sunflowers Beneath the Snow, An Enemy Like Me, and a recent Daughters of Green Mountain Gap. And she has a short story in here about a lighthouse that is just powerful. So in this book, there are 23 authors who have written 23 short stories, and these stories follow ordinary women from the 1470s to the 1960s as they rise to meet life's challenges. So these stories are purposeful, they're powerful, they're inspiring, and of course, they just prompt reflection about what it means to be a woman across these different time periods and how we might actually dare to be ourselves no matter what time period we are in. I think that each story, I can't talk this morning. Each short story has a great lesson to share that could spark reflection about our own identities too, which means you could head straight to your notebook. But I think it's also a really great opportunity to get to know many authors you might have not yet encountered so that you can go devour their backlists. That is what happened to me. I only knew Terry M. Brown heading into this book, and now I have 22 other authors whose stories resonated with me. Now I have a taste of their writing and know I would likely like their backlist as well. So there you have it. There's a little bit about what I learned in my reading life. Three books, three adult fiction books that I enjoyed. And the rest of my reading, and let me tell you, there was a lot in May. There were double digits of children's literature books that I read in May. I read a lot of picture books in order to prepare for some upcoming Kid Lit Love interviews. So if you're curious about some of those books and some of those authors, I urge you to go ahead to my other podcast, Kid Lit Love, and take a listen. Guess who's coming on next week? Did you guess? Kate DiCamillo. Dream come true. Yes. So if you love her as much as I do, go listen to that interview. It was powerful and it is coming up. Now, let's head to my writing life. My writing life has been on fire. It has been on fire for about 2 months in a row now, and I'm finally figuring out why. And when I figured it out, I went to the podcast as well to tell you all about it. But I learned about myself and my writing life that I do really well when my writing is sparked or prompted from my reading. If left to my own devices in my morning pages, I will just sit down and I will just write. And there's nothing wrong with just writing, but I tend to be a repetitive kind of writer. And I just talk about the same things that are going on all the time. And I know whatever needs to come up on the page can come up on the page. But even I'm getting bored. Even I'm getting annoyed. And so I really found that prompted writing, open-ended prompted writing is working for me, especially when it comes from my reading. So I love reading books like Kokoro by Beth Kempton that give me an exact journaling prompt to think about. But I also have been exploring other books that can do that as well. Day books, professional and personal development books, nonfiction, inspiring poetry. There's one book recommended from a listener, Amy S., called Simple Abundance by Sarah Ban Breathnack. And so many of you wrote in and said, oh my goodness, I read that book 20 years ago. Yeah, it's an old book and it still holds true. It's a 1 to 2 page little essay that inspires you to think about something that day. And there's enough of them for all 365 days of the year. And I've really enjoyed reading a snippet and then heading to my morning pages notebook. It just feels really, really personal and really meaningful. And so I feel like my writing is making a difference in my life in a way that I didn't feel before I tried this. I knew my writing helped, but here I feel like my writing is moving me in a really good direction. Now, I've also tinkered around with some other writing prompts. I mentioned in my review of the Red Address book that the book ends with a question. And I will not tell you what that question is because we do not do spoilers here. But let me just say that I went right to my notebook, wrote that question at the top, and started writing. Now, if you're wondering what some of these other more specific prompts are, if you're not on my email list yet, I highly recommend that you join. You can head to alitlife.com and you can click Free Literate Love and you can sign up, or you can click the link in the show notes. Every week, I give you one specific writing prompt that's working for me that you can then, of course, borrow or steal for your own notebooking. So that kind of combination, a little bit of reading and a little bit of writing in the morning, is working for me. I've also tried to think more about my writing rules, as I mentioned. I am a rule follower. I'm an upholder. I am a stickler for all of the things. And I have a hard time starting to do something one way and then changing gears. especially if it's been something in my routine. So I've been looking at that more. Like, who says I have to write a certain number of pages in the morning? Who says I can't sketch or draw in a book that I typically write in? Who says I need lines? Right. So I've been experimenting with some of that, realizing some of my rigid ways and realizing that some of those rigid ways might actually spill out into my actual life as well. And so I've been trying to learn to be more flexible. I'm really flexible because I do a lot of yoga, but flexibility of the mind, that is a completely different thing. Okay, now let's move on to learning. What have I learned about myself? And what have I just been learning? Well, right off the top, I want to tell you, and I want you to celebrate with me, that I have completed my meditation teacher training. Now, I know what you might be thinking, Stephanie, it's only been a couple of months. How the heck could you do that? It wasn't one of those big, giant, let me get a national certification in meditation kinds of trainings. It was so you want to learn more about meditation, you want to learn how to create your own, and you want to learn how to share it with others. Here you go. So technically, yes, I have a certificate for continuing education in meditation because I wanted it to enrich my life. I don't necessarily want to go teach others about meditation regularly. I wanted it to make myself feel better. I wanted it to really connect with my ideas of restorative reading that I'm trying to share with the world. And I did want to learn how to tinker in some reading and writing meditations. And so those are coming up, I promise. But I was really proud of myself to be able to check that off in May. Now, when we think about the questions I was asking myself, what do I think about my learning life? Where's my mind wander? Where do I feel guilt? What's catching my attention? How can I bring more of what I love into my life? I was kind of blending my learning and loving categories this month. And because of all the writing I've been doing in my notebook, I stumbled on something pretty big. It's pretty big, it's pretty deep, and it's pretty personal. But I'm going to say it anyway because hey, it's the monthly Literate Love session, and that's what we do here. I have learned, I have learned that a lot of my behavior in life, a lot of the things I do, a lot of the things I try, a lot of the things that I learn and love, I do those things to avoid pain, not necessarily to chase joy. And that was a big one to uncover in my notebook. And I will explain. So I do a lot, right? I read a lot, I write a lot, I'm learning meditation. I try to learn something new every day. I do things with family or friends or relationships or all the things, my daily actions, right down to what I do when I wake up in the morning to how I go to bed at night. I realize a lot of those routines are to avoid pain, physical pain and emotional pain. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want you to think that I'm like in this lump over here of physical and emotional pain. I am not. I am not because I do all of these wonderful things to keep it at bay. But I realized I'm so good at being proactive, but I'm not as good as just doing something to do it for fun because I want to, right? That rigidity that I just talked about in my writing life that spills over into my actual life, that's there. Like I have a really hard time doing something that doesn't have some sort of purpose, right? Of giving up 2 hours in an afternoon to do something that isn't going to have an end result. I've always been that way, but I realized I am really that way right now. And so that was a big one for me. And so I spent a lot of time this month thinking about what I do on a daily basis and why I do it and what I do in my work or my personal life or whatever aspects of my life. Why do I do those things? And I did realize that so many of them are to be proactive and avoid pain or frustration or sadness or whatever. It's just to avoid the negative things that might come instead of just going head first after the positive things that I know are out there. I told you that is big. I don't know. Are any of you out there like me? I think you are, because I know lots of you, and I know all of us are striving to be better in so many ways. And I've just realized that sometimes that striving to be better, maybe we have to stop and wonder where that comes from and decide to not strive to be better, but just go have some freaking fun. Go have fun. So that's where I am in terms of my learning and my loving life. And I do want to mention, in relation to that fun, Anna K. Morris has been on the podcast before. She has talked about her amazing journaling techniques. She is the woman I credit with literally saving my Thanksgiving because of her mindset coaching. And she is doing a summer fun summit. I mean, talk about synchronicity. When I start to realize I need more fun, here comes Anna. And Anna is pulling together some amazing women to talk about how to boost the fun in your summer. And guess what? I am one of them. And I know you might be thinking, wait, what? Stephanie, you just said you need to have more fun. Well, I know how to have fun with books and notebooks, right? And so that's my role. That's what I'm talking about in the summer. How to have a really great summer reading life that can help you have some fun. But there are so many other women on coming to this summit that are talking about lifestyle and mocktails and flowers and saying yes to things, finding love, all of the topics. We did a 1 hour planning call, and I couldn't believe the energy that came out of that group. So I can't imagine what this summit is going to be like. And here's the best part. If you're listening in real time on the last day of May, the summit starts on Monday. It starts on June 3rd, and there are 1 hour sessions Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. The best part, it's completely free. It's completely free, and the sessions are recorded. So if you just want a little bit of summer inspiration to have some fun, head to the show notes, click on the link, and sign up. I promise these women are amazing, and I cannot wait to learn from them. Now, as an aside, I always love talking about in my weekly Literate Love, at least lately, some sort of easy recipe that I've tried. You know, I'm gluten-free and dairy-free, so things can get a little bit hairy, but I found on Instagram this so-called delicious bagel bite recipe that was just almond flour and dairy-free yogurt mixed together, rolled up into balls, baked in the oven. If you wanted to, you could add everything bagel seasoning. These things looked amazing. They looked like bagels. I could not wait to try them. I tried them, and let me tell you, they do not taste like bagels. They do not taste like bagels. However, they were a tasty little muffin-like treat that, with a little dairy-free butter and strawberry preserves, were actually quite good. So if you're curious of what those were, then I will put them in the show notes. And then lastly, I just wanted to thank you again for all of the wonderful comments I've been receiving on the Get Literate Summer Reading Challenge. It's a different kind of reading challenge. It's 3 books, 1 book a month, that isn't just some random beach read or read a book because it has a summer sport on the cover. It's a challenge to help you be, feel, and do what you want to be, feel, and do this summer. And I've loved hearing from so many of you how refreshing that was. I loved hearing about some of the titles that you are putting on your own challenge. And I do hope you will fill out that graphic and post them so that we can keep talking about our summer reading lives all summer long. Well, that's it for me. There you have it, the wrap up of my monthly Literate Love for May of 2024. I went deep, I dug deep, and I found out a lot about myself in relation to my reading life, my writing life, and just my learning and loving about life in general. I hope that my questions posed to myself give you an opportunity to stop and reflect. I hope that you'll take some of the books that I've read and perhaps add them to your own TBR. And maybe I'll convince you to add some morning reading and writing to your routine as well. I hope so. And then again, stay tuned because I think I'll be sharing a little bit more about what I've learned on my meditation journey, specifically as it relates to readers and writers in a couple of upcoming episodes. If you have an episode that you would love for me to talk about here on the show over the summer, please send it my way. You can comment on the show notes at alitlife.com. You can head to your favorite social media platform and find my posting for this episode at AfinitoLit. You can send me a DM, send me an email at stephanieaffinito@gmail.com, or you can click that little audio button in your podcast platform and send me an audio message. And one more thing. If this is the last day of the month, that means tomorrow is the first day of a brand new month. And the first day of a brand new month means a new one-word theme to read, write, and learn and love into existence inside my Patreon community. So if you're curious as to what that word might be and how we do what we do in there, you can head to getliterate.co and take a look, or head to the link in the show notes. It's only $5 a month. You get a bibliotherapy book calendar, bonus episodes every Sunday, first chapter Fridays every Friday, a book club, and so much more. So I hope to see you there. I hope this sparked a little bit of intention about your monthly literate love, and I hope that you will share it with me. Thanks for listening to this bonus episode, everyone, and I will see you next week for our regularly scheduled session. Happy reading and writing. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Get Literate podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes and at alitlife.com. Plus, if you want more, you might like to join my Patreon community. There, you'll find additional inspiration for your reading and writing life, like bonus podcast episodes, bibliotherapy book calendars, monthly book clubs, notebooking challenges, live events, giveaways, and much, much more. It's only $5 a month, and you get instant access to all of the previous content too. You can learn more at getliterate.co. And one more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish and notebookish community too. Thanks for listening.